In 525 BCE, 50,000 men marched into the Egyptian desert on the orders of a Persian king determined to crush anyone who defied him, and they were never seen again. No survivors, wreckage, or bodies. For 2,500 years, scholars have been trying to work out exactly what happened to this army, and the real answer, in my eyes, could be stranger than the legend itself. This is the mystery of the long-lost army of Cambyses. So, the year is 525 BCE. Cambyses II, ruler of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, has invaded Egypt, defeating Pharaoh Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium. He took Memphis, exiled Psamtik, and then headed south towards Thebes, modern Luxor. He adopted the Egyptian throne name Mesutire and tried to rule as a legitimate pharaoh. Our army marched out of Thebes and reached the oasis of Karga after 7 days, the last stop before empty desert. From there, they turned west towards Siwa, but that is the last anyone claims to have seen them. Now, our one and only source of this mystery comes from the father of history himself, Herodotus. And Herodotus does give us an account of events, but even he admits that it's second-hand. I'm now going to read to you Herodotus' account. It is written in my handwriting though, so I apologise in advance if I struggle. Thus far, it is said, the army came. After that, save the Ammonians themselves and those who heard from them, no man can say aught of them. For they neither reached the Ammonians nor returned back. But this is what the Ammonians themselves say. When the Persians were crossing the sand from the oasis to attack them, and were about midway between their country and the oasis, while they were breakfasting, a great and violent south wind arose, which buried them in the masses of sand which it bore. And so they disappeared from sight. Such is the Ammonian tale about this army. But there's a key problem with this, because Herodotus wasn't there or writing at all contemporary with the events. So who actually told him this? Herodotus wasn't an eyewitness. He was writing about 75 years after the event would have taken place, and he admittedly gets the whole story from the Ammonians, the people of Siwa themselves. And I will add a little disclaimer here. Herodotus' account says that there was 50,000 troops in the army, but ancient sources, especially him, love to exaggerate the size of armies. So it probably wasn't 50,000, but it was probably quite a big army nonetheless. And this isn't the only story of a crazy Cambyses written by Herodotus, which falls apart with a little bit of scrutiny. So Herodotus also claimed that Cambyses, in a fit of sacrilegious rage, slaughtered the sacred Apis bull calf as a newborn. However, the burial records have survived, and the Apis bull which died during his reign was 20 years old, not a newborn. Now, I know it's a relatively small detail, but if Herodotus got that wrong in a story that he treats as fact, how much can we really trust the sandstorm? So, if the sandstorm story is doubtful, which I would say it is, what actually happened to this army? They couldn't have just disappeared. Well, in 2009, someone claimed to have finally found the answer. Let me introduce you to Angelo and Alfredo Castiglioni, who in November 2009 announced to the world that they'd found the lost army of Cambyses. Finds included bronze weapons, a silver bracelet, and scattered human remains in an area of Egypt's western desert near Siwa. Headlines went out around the world that Egypt's lost army of Cambyses had been found. There was just one problem though. They hadn't published a single peer-reviewed paper. All of their discovery was announced through their own documentary film rather than any kind of scientific journal. Sound familiar? I bet it does. Now, Zawi Hawass, you might have heard of him, he's the Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, released a statement within days, calling the reports, quote, unfounded and misleading. The site the Castiglionis pointed to wasn't even under their control. In fact, the site had already been excavated by a completely different Italian team in 2002, and the two brothers didn't get any permission to dig there whatsoever. And this wasn't even the first false alarm. Back in 2000, a geological survey team found some scattered textile fragments and some human remains in the same desert, and for a brief time claimed the same thing, before that story eventually disappeared too. 17 years on, and there's still no peer-reviewed study or even a verified excavation. The discovery, which got headlines around the world by every academic standard, has gone nowhere. So if it wasn't a sandstorm, and it wasn't whatever this was, then what was it? Well, in 2014, an answer came from a completely different direction, and this time it wasn't a headline chasing a discovery, it was a real discovery which led to a real theory. Olaf Kaper, an archaeologist from Leiden University, who I know has not got the best name for trusting his archaeological theories, but we're going to believe him on this occasion. He'd spent a decade excavating at Almeida, a site in Egypt's Dalka oasis, hundreds of miles from Siwa. Now, Kaper wasn't looking for Cambyses' army at all. Instead, he was piecing together temple blocks from a shrine dedicated to the god Thoth, and in doing so, he was reconstructing a list of royal titles that had been inscribed into them. And they belonged to a name most people haven't heard of, Petubastis III. Petubastis was an Egyptian rebel leader who refused to accept Persian rule, and had clearly built himself quite a power base in Dalkla, and this really does change things. Because Kaper's theory is that the army was never just passing through the desert on the way to Siwa, it was heading towards Dalkla, toward Petubastis, and Petubastis ambushed it. Using that victory, Petubastis swept out of the desert, reclaimed a whole chunk of Egypt, and claimed himself pharaoh at Memphis. For a brief moment, Persian rule in Egypt had genuinely collapsed. Why did no one know about this for 25 centuries? Well, 2 years later, Darius I crushed the revolt of Petubastis, and he would have had every reason to bury what really happened. Admitting that 50,000 of his predecessors' best men were wiped out by Egyptian rebels would have been quite humiliating, but blaming the weather, I guess, wasn't too bad. Darius even seemingly built over the physical evidence, commissioning major temple projects in the Western Oasis in the years after, the kind of building program that could conveniently erase what came before. By the time Herodotus came onto the scene 75 years later, the story of the sandstorm was the only thing that remained. Now, this isn't a certainty. There's no mass grave and there's no universally accepted answer here, but it's the only theory in 2,500 years built from something more than just a legend. So, a sandstorm, a hoax, or a rebel ambush lost to history. For over 2,500 years, the desert has kept its answer. Mr. Kaper's theory is the closest thing we have to an answer, but closest does not equal certain, and that's what ultimately makes the army's disappearance still a mystery. Now, my money is on Kaper, but if you'd bet on one of the other ones, or you have a theory of your own, please drop it in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to support the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.